Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We welcome everyone. If you're joining us while you're having your dinner, welcome you. Thank you for tuning on our social media. Thank you, and I also thank my executive committee who are here. Thank you for joining us. So I know it's a cold night. Maybe if you're at home, it might be a best spot to, join us in this presentation. And if you haven't subscribed for our newsletter, please feel free to do so. Thanks again. And I think today, one of the speakers are not available today, so it could be a very short meeting. But sometimes when you think it's a short meeting, but it always goes longer. So thank you. And also, Leon, thank you for joining us as well. So cool. Excellent. So they're the regular things like, it's streamed on Facebook and, it's all available on the social media. So if you want to watch it later, you can watch it later as well. And if you're not following us on our social media, please do so. So before we're going to go about tonight's speakers, I just want to make a few things. We've been trying to engage with the GCC. Yes, we do have a regular meeting, but we couldn't catch up with them for the last couple of times. They have rescheduled it, so we will work out on those things. The budget submission, we did a budget submission as part of the GCC. Another update, we're thinking of asking some of the questions on our social media platform so that we can get the feel of what's the community wants, in terms of the health facilities, what's available in the Gungahlin, or say, for instance, the cinemas, whether we've been waiting forever. And some of the calls that I do get, majority of them, it's about cinemas as well. So I just sort of want to float some questions on the Facebook to see what's the feedback we receive on some of the topics. So that's probably coming up soon. So once we sort out with the committee to see what are the questions we want to test and what we want to float, we'll post them very shortly, and then based on that we can do some kind of action. Traditionally, we've done a lot of letters to the MLAs and even to the ministers. Some of them it's just like it's gone and it never came back. So we just want to do something productive and make it happen rather than just under the red carpet and put it under the red carpet. So we just want to do something to make sure that we achieve some results. So watch out that space. That's all I want to give an update for tonight. Also, we worked along with the Gungahlin Community Council, and thanks Peter for putting it together with the planning bill and all those the letters that we been sent as part of the Gungahlin Community Council. That's happening. Those are the things I think the major things that's been happening around. The other things, if it's something urgent or something that we need to update the community, please do follow our website and Facebook, so we will keep you all informed and updated. Without further ado, for the tonight's agenda, so we have Canberra Airport update. So we're got some exciting news happening in our Canberra Airport. So I'd like to know more about it if you're traveling, especially in Gungahlin. I think I don't know whether you have a data for that, Michael, but if you probably put a data, maybe most of the international traveling might be happening from Gungahlin, considering the demographic, the people who live here. So yeah, good to know what's happening in the Canberra airport and what about any international flights and all those kind of things. So we do have updates from that. And also we do have updates from friends of Araby Pond about what's happening around Araby Pond. So we got Darren as well with us. So let me welcome Michael. to come and do the presentation was the head of aviation. Tonight, Michael, I hope you're going to give us what's happening around Canberra and what's the new flights and all those things. We are excited to have you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for having me come along, talk a little bit about what's happening at the airport. It's been a pretty interesting couple of years for aviation. Canberra Airport historically had about 9,000 passengers a day. For the month of October last year, we had 9,000 for the month. So we had 1 day's passengers for a month, and we were closed 2 days a week. But thankfully, things are going in the right direction. Where are we now? Well, interestingly, before COVID, we flew to 7 domestic destinations. As we've come out of COVID, we've seen more and more that people want to fly direct. They don't want to go via Sydney, they don't want to go via Melbourne, they want to get on a plane in Canberra, get off where they're going. So we've gone from 7 destinations to 12 destinations now, and there's a couple of others that are in the pipeline that we're speaking to various airports and airlines about, and we'd hope that we'll be able to increase that. Big news, as Henley mentioned, is return of international travel. So on the 21st of July, we will start operating again as an international terminal, which is really exciting for everyone, I think. And we have 7 airlines flying to Canberra, which works out at about 430 flights a week. So as I mentioned, 21st of July, a big Fijian welcome. They commence operating twice a week. They'll be flying on Tuesdays and Fridays, direct into Nandi. It's about 4 hours straight up into Nandi. The latest 737 Maxes, the youngest and newest aircraft in the Pacific. One of the interesting things about that flight also is that it's on the ground for 2 hours in Nandi. You can change planes then, get on a direct flight into LA or San Francisco or Vancouver. So a lot of people are going to start using it, and if you compare it to going via Sydney, it's pretty much as quick to go direct into Nandi and then on to West Coast as to go via Sydney, because you don't have that bus trip across the airport that we all would prefer not to take. As I said, it's 737 Max. It's a brand new aircraft. In October, they'll be going to 3 flights a week as well. So they'll be starting a flight probably on a Sunday. It'll be Sunday, Tuesday, Friday, we think. And probably the other important thing about the Fiji service starting, it's meant that we could start conversations again with international carriers who have previously been servicing Canberra. So Singapore, Qatar, we've also been talking to a couple of carriers about opportunities into New Zealand and possibly another sun destination up north of us as well. This just shows what's happened with passengers over a period. We track ourselves against 2019 because it was the last year we had non-COVID impacted, and you'll see we've tracked just slightly below 2019 figures. We're at about 80 to 90% domestically, but obviously we don't have 2 carriers operating 7 days a week going internationally, so that accounts for the difference. What we have had in recent times is the start of the Jetstar service to Canberra, which was one that probably wasn't going to happen for a long time, but the opportunity arose for a lot of people wanting to take holidays out of Canberra. They're now operating to Brisbane, Coolangatta and Melbourne. We have Rex also operating to Melbourne. So plenty of opportunities for Canberrans to get out, but also plenty of opportunity for tourists and people wanting to do business to come in. So we see it as a benefit both for our community in terms of employment, in terms of tourism, but also in terms of people being able to travel. And that pretty much is my presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions. One thing you may have seen recently, a frustration that we are experiencing at the moment is the number of cancellations of flights. At the moment, Qantas flights to Sydney are running at about 12% cancellation, which we think is really not very acceptable. It's a hassle for people travelling. It's also just not the service that we want the airport and the airlines to provide. So we're working very hard with Qantas to see if we can reduce those cancellations. And that's probably my presentation, unless there's any questions. A couple of questions, yeah.
I just heard something recently about flying to Auckland so that they can have direct flights to New York.
Yes, Qantas have just started flying direct from Auckland to New York. They're doing it 4 days a week. Part of our discussion with Qantas and also with Air New Zealand is the opportunity to tap into that market. We've currently got an aircraft called an E190, which is about a 100-seat jet, which would be perfect to service that route. We think the success of Singapore flying into Wellington shows that if we went to Auckland with a slightly smaller aircraft, the demand is there in Canberra. So we're trying to encourage the airlines to take a look at that.
A few years ago, you were trying to get a lot more freight. A few years ago, you were trying to get a lot more freight. I'm just wondering how that's all going.
Yeah, we see that as a real potential for Canberra, not only for some of the stuff that we're manufacturing here, but also the fast perishable goods from the region. So cherries from Young, seafood from down the coast. One of the attractions of having Singapore operate is, for example, with cherries, you could have them picked that morning, have them trucked to Canberra in 2 hours, processed, put on the flight to Singapore, and they would have been in Singapore at 5, 6 o'clock the next day. So really fresh, high quality produce. It started to pick up pace towards the end of 2019. And in fact, the biggest shipment we have had from Canberra was 25 tonnes of Tasmanian salmon in 2019, just before Christmas, which went on a Singapore flight into Singapore. And you know, the idea of Tasmanian salmon coming through Canberra it's kind of hard to comprehend in a way, but what we have as an advantage is it's easy to get here. You can get produce quickly onto a plane and you can get it away. So you don't have the issues of having to truck it up to Sydney or down to Melbourne. You don't have the issues of produce perhaps sitting on the tarmac for extended periods of time, which means that you can get high yield for your produce. Post-COVID, we've started that discussion again. We've started doing some roadshows around the region as well to meet with councils, to meet with producers. So over time we will get there, but it's probably been a slower burn than we would have hoped for.
and one that you probably can't answer, but is of great interest to us. What other commercial things might be happening out at the airport, like other new offices or new shops?
During COVID, we actually put up 5 office blocks. So there's been pretty substantial growth in that area. The TGA moved from Symington over to Fairburn. We have a new building that's just about finished in Majura. There's 2 buildings in the business park. The business park now has over 12,000 people working in it. It's actually the second largest employment centre in Canberra.
Yeah, don't tell us that. Perhaps you might like to think about Gungahlin as just being an extension of the airport?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the group is always looking for opportunity, and I think what we have found with the success of the business park has been it's attracted a certain type of organisation. So there's a lot of defence out there. There's a lot of suppliers to defence, but Gungahlin is extremely close to the airport and should provide opportunity.
Thanks, Michael. A good little overview. I actually came back from Melbourne on sometime last week on an E190 in Qantas colours, and quite a comfortable little aircraft.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the big challenges for flying at the moment is price.
Yes.
I guess is really not an airport problem per se, but an industry insider. But I've family in Perth, and flying there is particularly costly. In fact, any regional location in Australia is pretty pricey. What do you see the trend there? I mean, are we sort of stuck with this forever, or is there some sort of are there other factors that are going to start driving those costs down?
Yeah, we share your frustration. Our business model is based on passengers, individual passengers. We get the same amount of money whether the airfare is $100 or $500. So certainly in our interest to see cheaper fares. Cheaper fares mean more people. More passengers means a better outcome for us as well. And that's why having carriers such as Jetstar are important for us in Canberra. Canberra's always been historically a fairly expensive market. The airlines know they can drive good yield. What will happen in the future? Over time, you would think fuel prices are coming down, capacity is increasing in the market, albeit very slowly. So over time, we would expect to see prices come down, but I don't think they'll come down in a rapid rate. The airlines are making extremely good money at the moment, and so you would imagine they will try to continue that as long as they possibly can, much to all of our frustration.
Michael, we got a question from online. You mentioned about the Singapore Airlines and Qatar.
Yeah.
Do we have any dates or roughly this year or maybe early next year?
I'd love to say yes, we do.
Yeah.
We're constantly in conversation with both carriers. Singapore will definitely come back. It's a question of when they reach capacity out of Sydney, which they're getting close to, and also when they have aircraft availability. So one of the big challenges coming out of COVID was airlines got rid of aircraft, so there's a shortage of aircraft, and they also had issues with pilots and engineers and ground crew, so they've got to build up that workforce again. I would like to say that we would expect Singapore within the next 18 months, maybe quicker. Qatar, we were pretty much there with them October last year, and then they had an issue with ground handling in Canberra, and so have delayed the start. But again, they see the benefit of coming to Canberra, both in terms of the market, but also being a regional port and being the capital are good reasons for them to come back.
Yeah, excellent. So in terms of the Canberra airport, how many employers working at the moment? Do you still have a lot of jobs, or is there any restrictions on those jobs? Still, are we doing those vaccine mandate and those kind of hold rules, or what's happening in the airport, like in terms of staff and the rules, and are you getting enough people?
Yeah, I mean, we, as I said, our business model is we're paid by the passengers, so we always want more people.
Yeah.
From an employment perspective, we've been fairly lucky that we were able to diversify our income streams pretty well, which meant that we really didn't lay off too many people. But like every business in Canberra, I think at the moment there's a shortage of good quality candidates. So we're always looking for good quality people to come and work at the airport.
And there's no restrictions in terms of the vaccine mandate and stuff anymore?
None whatsoever.
All right, good. So I think Kevin made a good point about the employment hub, you know. So I think most of the conversation when we have with the ACT government about the employment, how to bring it, you know. So I think there is if you guys, you know, I know you guys invest quite a lot around Canberra. I think there's a good opportunity in Gungahlin, and especially considering we don't have much of employment base in Gungahlin. So in the morning we do have an exodus, probably most of them coming to your Brindabilla Park. You know, we always have that road kind of fully, you know, everyone is busy on that road. So, so yeah, I think that's the kind of thing for you probably, if you can take to your team and look for the opportunities.
I was reading recently, there was an article about your frustration about not having a government department based here. We're very much a Canberra organisation, owned by a Canberra family who really want to focus on Canberra. So if there are opportunities, we're always open to taking a look at what that may be.
Okay, good. I think the final question probably in terms of the transport, you know, the public transport between Canberra Airport and Gungahlin.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to say we're going to stop. You know, no one should use the car anymore, or we're going to get around. You know, but the reality and the practicality is we don't have any, you know, option other than to take the car, and you know, and especially. Or in Gungahlin, what we see, we do have a public transport. Everyone talk about the light rail. Of course, we do have that. But it doesn't go everywhere. It just go to the city and then come back. And our connectivity between the other town centres are limited. And especially because it's being Majura Park being an employment hub, I don't see any transport happening between the Majura Park and Gungahlin. So is there something we can work along with you, or, you know, partnership with you, to at least we can have that peak hour buses between...
We're always trying to work with ACT government to improve connectivity to the airport. So recently they put on some more services into Fairburn because of the increase in office staff there. It's certainly something we'd be more than happy to have a discussion with you. It would be great if we could get some hard data about how many people are going back and forth.
So only with the data, we can't get the data because you can reach the Canberra airport, but you've got to go to city and then take from there and then come back. So those data, you know, it's going to be very minimal, and it's not going to be a...
But even if we could get some data about how many people live in Gungahlin and work at the airport, then that may help us in terms of approaching ACT government. But we're the same as you. We want more connectivity rather than less. And if we do talk about being a green city, well, we need to provide opportunity for people to take greener modes of transport, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. If we don't have, do you have one more question, Kevin? I know that.
We've started to hear again about fast trains.
Yep.
Is the Canberra airport, I mean, it would make sense to have a fast train stop at the airport.
Yeah.
Are you making submissions, or what are you doing in that area?
Yeah, we've always been extremely supportive of the idea of a fast rail. We think it is something that should be progressed, but you know, probably like me, we've been hearing about it for quite a few years now. The airport itself was designed to actually have a railway station in it, a terminus station in it. So just next to one of our car parks, the design includes a train stop there. We certainly think it's a better option than going tunnelling through Majura. It's a cheaper option. It does provide a transport hub then. So yeah, we're very supportive, and we've made those representations to ACT government and New South Wales government. And sorry, I should have said we actually work very closely with a lot of the councils around here as well. So collectively, I think everyone would like to see an improved transport to Sydney, particularly. You know, it's difficult, isn't it?
Thanks, Michael, for sharing that valuable information. I guess everyone like me interested in the international flights. So I want to know whether Emirates or Etihad are interested in having their international flights.
Yeah, we've talked to both. There is some level of interest, but at the moment, because they've still got capacity into Sydney and Melbourne, they would rather focus on those two centres and have people fly back and forth, particularly into the subcontinent. We think Singapore provides a good option. We're also in discussion with a couple of other airlines up there that may provide some opportunity, because we see that as a real benefit to the Canberra community. If we can achieve some easier transits into the Asian continent, it'd be good for all of us.
I said the last question, Michael. Sorry, I do have one
No
more question.
problem.
You know, when Singapore Airlines was flying in Canberra, what's the stats? Is it was always full, or were they running with profit, or?
Yeah, they were. It was a route that they saw both benefit in terms of passenger loads, which were reasonably strong, but they also saw the benefit in having a presence in Canberra. So there was sort of two benefits to them. They remain, I was actually speaking to them only last week, they remain keen on coming back to Canberra when they're in a position to do so. I'd be very surprised if they didn't.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the presentation, and we do appreciate for you coming to the community. We'll probably have those conversations about the transport and other things, employment opportunity. We'll keep in touch, so that'll be great. And let's move on to the next presentation, which is all about the Yarrabee Pond updates, and we'd like to welcome Darren, our very own Darren. So Darren will do the presentation.
Hi, thanks everybody. Just want to start with a progress update for Yarrabee Pond. So there's been a fair bit that's been going on in Yarrabee Pond for a number of years now, and hopefully we can provide you with a bit of an update about some of the things that have been going on. So initially, a lot of the Yarrabee Pond, some of those aspects have been raised by myself in the Community Council a number of times. the reason why Yarrabee Pond actually came about was because of a presentation by John Beagle in regards to Yarrabee Pond, and he was looking at a way in which maybe he could formalise a group that essentially could convey some of the concerns that he knew existed within the community, and the fact that I had advocated for many years quite strongly about Yarrabee Pond, we were sort of matched together if there was anybody that was going to be able to sort of, pair with John. And initially, I guess some of the petitions that we know that exist within Gungahlin sometimes can be quite difficult. And I think it's because of the demographic of Gungahlin and the fact that a lot of people who live in Gungahlin are relatively new, and sometimes it can be difficult to get them to sort of sign on to petitions and get involved in the community activities that I think in some areas of Canberra is a bit easier. So one of the things that we decided to do was to launch a petition to the government, an e-petition, and go to a fair bit of trouble, I guess you could say, to actually actively engage with the community to try and work out whether they would support the things that we wanted to do down at Yarrabee Pond. So we spent a lot of time in the petition, and this is a picture of Kay and John down at Yarrabee Ponds with handing out information to the public and asking a lot of questions in regards to what the community would like. Because one of the things that we're very conscious of is that we didn't want to dictate to the community about some of the things that we're going to go through in Yarrabee Pond. We wanted the community to sort of come to us and decide collectively about what was in the best interest of the people of Gungahlin who live in the area. So the good thing is that we did this petition sponsored with Michael Patterson, and we got over 1,000 signatures. I think it was 1,000, potentially 1,600. I think some of them were written and some of them were e-petitions. And I guess one of the things that I'd suggest is the e-petitions were a little bit difficult for some people, so we made sure that we printed out some forms for people to sign. And the petition, I noticed the e-petitions, they don't work well with mobile devices and things like that. So I think a lot of people have sort of ran into those problems, so that's a bit of a tip to the ACT government to maybe have a look at the software that's in the background there that's actually doing the e-petitions, because for a lot of people they found that it was somewhat difficult in order to do it. But moving along, we did get over 1,000 signatures, and the good thing about that is that we were able to go to the Legislative Assembly where the petition was put forward. It was supported by a number of local MLAs. I think that most of the MLAs in Gungahlin realise that Yarrabee Pond has a special place in the heart for a lot of people that are here. And we also believe that Yarrabee Pond is important because of the high density living that we now have in the area. A lot of the things that become really important for people when you have the medium to high density is a lot of green space that they can enjoy. And that's something that I've really been conscious of is that the level of investment in Yarrabee Pond probably I don't think has really facilitated the well-being of a lot of the people that are living in the high-rise apartments that are living across the road, because particularly during COVID, often this was the only space that they had in order to really get outdoors and experience, if they don't have the backyards and they don't have the 1,000 square metre blocks, they really miss out on certain aspects of an Australian culture that I think that is really important. And one of the things that I'm really conscious of is that if we want to sort of move away from urban sprawl and we want to have higher density living, these types of district parks and spaces become increasingly important, that they're invested in and brought up to a certain standard that I think is normal for a lot of people that come from other regions. So people in Melbourne, for example, they would come down and they would say that their parks and gardens are meticulously sort of maintained, and a lot of the people within our group even would say that Yarrabee Pond often wasn't well maintained. And for a district park, considering the amount of people in Gungahlin that visit there regularly, we really didn't feel that the investment was really there. So one of the things that kicked off from the petition was a Yorsay. And the Yorsay looked at many elements from the general community. One of the things that I guess we were proud of is that the response from the community was very close to exactly kind of the responses that we got from the community. So when they did the Your Say, we were kind of a bit like, yeah, well, we're already aware of that because we've already talked to the community, and it was good to see that that reflected a lot of the things that we had talked about. So you can see that there was a lot of things about improved paths, general cleanliness, enhanced lighting to improve visibility, more facilities such as bins and toilets and parking arrangements and things like that. So there's a lot of things that came up that we already really knew about. There was also $300,000 in the budget, the ACT budget, that we weren't really sure what that was for. And I just wanted to put this in here because essentially a lot of that budget went into rejuvenating this particular area, which is near the shopfront. So they used a lot of the money in order to repaint and replant some plants and things like that in that area, because this was actually looking pretty shabby. It was all rusted, and so they used a lot of that money in order to rehabilitate that area. But one of the things that I found is that it does go to show you that $300,000 doesn't necessarily go that far when you're looking at the type of investment that you sort of really need. So if you want to look at $300,000, then generally that was just a spruce up of the area that was spent in that. So it gives you some indication as to, the sorts of investment that you really need if you want to really reduce it. This area, by the way, is an area that's near the shopfront there. We believe this area could really do with more investment, because a lot of the businesses in this area that we feel for is a lot of those businesses have gone belly up, essentially, particularly the types of businesses that need a lot of passing traffic and, people walking past them, and the parking issues that exist in that area as well. So we've raised that continually, but this particular area is not activated very well. I often sort of see maybe a couple of bikes chained up there and that sort of thing. And one of the things that we're really sort of pushing for is maybe to activate this area potentially with a small children's playground, or maybe a barbecue area, because we do know that children's playground barbecue areas are really difficult to actually get to a lot of the time because they're just full of people all the time. And it's good that they're utilised, but it'd be nice for this area to be activated a little bit more. So recently there was a $11,000 grant essentially that has been given to this area particularly on behalf of the Ginninderra Catchment Group. So we're aligned with the Ginninderra Catchment Group. A couple of things that we're sort of trying to look at as a way in which we could potentially activate this area. And one of the things is in regards to maybe some planter boxes and things like that, because I'd inquired about whether or not we could have a floor yard in this area, because some of the other areas like Flory I've been to have a lot of the bulbs and things like that, and it really activates that area. But the problem is that I've learned is that if you apply for the floor yard, they only supply the bulbs, they don't supply the soil or the planters and things like that. So hopefully with the $11,000 grant that's gone through, although we have a lot of criteria that we need to cover in regards to the urban heat island effects, and hopefully we can actually get some sort of water storage there as well, so we can help with the maintenance of it. There's some people that have been really active in the area that have all sorts of plants and things like that on the pavement area that's up there. They're really trying their best in order to jazz up this area. So hopefully in the future we can get some more investment in this particular area, because we feel that would bring the traffic up from the Yarrabee Pond up into the business area and hopefully add a little bit more activation. A couple of things that I guess seem simple but are fairly difficult to achieve was just simple bench seats. So we found a lot of the elderly people and also people that just wanted to enjoy the area. There was nowhere really for them to sit down and enjoy the Yarrabee Pond. And so one of the things that came from the Your Say as well as the petition that we put down was we just wanted some areas that we could have some simple park benches for people to actually sit down and enjoy Yarrabee Pond. So there's a number of these. I think there were about 3 or 4 locations that they actually built them, which was great. So we were really happy about that. Another thing that took a long time in order to get through was the softball essentially was in a really bad state. So we kind of felt that this really needed to be implemented ASAP, because a lot of the children were playing in the area, and sometimes there were holes that were big enough in that softball that some children, small children about 2 or 3, would half disappear into the hole. And so one of the things that I put forward was that if there's an accident in the area, it probably would be cheaper in order to, have new softball put in than have a potential claim, essentially. So we were happy about the fact that that has been redone, the flying foxes there, and the new softball was put in, which we were really happy about. Unfortunately, the swings have been taken off, the flying foxes, and that's been going on for about 6 months now. So we sort of really don't know what's going on. It's one of the major draw cards for Yarrabee Ponds, and I realised there was an incident in one of the other parks in regards to flying foxes, so I do understand that there potentially might be some safety concerns, but it's been a long time, and it'd be nice to sort of see some sort of, those flying foxes come back, because the kids really miss those, so it'd be nice to see something done about that at some stage. The Rotary Rotunda, so we sort of spent a fair bit of time with the Rotary of Gungahlin in order to work out the best sort of location for the rotunda. I think the rotunda is great. I think I always need to mention that it is an initiative that is joined to the ACT government. So the ACT government came in and did the power that now exists in this spot here. They also helped with a lot of the paths that were built there. The Gungahlin Community Council contributed a significant amount of money in order to help to enlarge the area, because originally it was a lot smaller than what it is today, and without the significant contribution of the Gungahlin Community Council, they would not have been able to build the size that it is there. It was also a federal government grant as well, so that was from Andrew Lee. So that helped as well to build the rotunda. So we think that that's been a great addition to Yarrabee Pond, and it's been utilised a lot in regards to people having bands and things like that are down there. And a lot of times when it's raining and things like that, it's a place that people can sort of retreat to if there's sort of torrential sort of rain and things like that going on. Another thing I just wanted to point out here is these are the bridges around Yarrabee Pond, and we continually get a lot of complaints in regards to the surfacing of those bridges. I've had at least 2 reports that have come through that of people actually being hospitalised, actually walking across these bridges, particularly elderly people. It's also not great for people that have prams. It's not great if you see the holes that are now existing there in regards to people that have walking frames. Ultimately, the areas here that have been redone have a better mesh type material. So they're aware of the issues. I think there was a tender potentially that was put forward to resurface these bridges, but we haven't really heard anything back from that. So I think the government is aware of the issue. It's just one of these work in progresses that we're working towards. So I guess the first thing is to highlight the issue. And we're happy about the fact that the issue's been highlighted, but we're sort of no further towards when these bridges will be resurfaced. And we do know that a lot of bridges have been rebuilt and things like that around Canberra. We're just looking forward to the time that we can actually write back to some of our constituents that talk to us about this surfacing and get this safety issue fixed, because it's a bit of a problem. This here is for the Clean Up Australia Day. So we had the canoes and things like that are out on the ponds. This here, we discovered this jetty is actually a turnaround area for launching watercraft, because I'd often wondered what the area here is for, where you've got the gravel and things, and so it's essentially an area where you can have kayaks put out onto the water. The problem is that I get a lot of inquiries from people about the safety of the water, and one of the things is interesting is that Yarrabee Ponds is essentially classified as a water settlement pond, essentially, which is fair enough because it is quite shallow, and maybe that was the original conception of Yarrabee Pond, but Yarrabee Pond is now utilised as a recreational area, and when I get questions like this, whether or not the water is safe, essentially, a lot of people realise that in areas like Tuggeranong and in Ginninderra and stuff like that in Belconnen, the water's tested, and the water's tested to verify whether or not it's safe for people to swim in, which is primary exposure, and this is secondary exposure. So if you're in a kayak and you get splashed with water and that water essentially has bacteria in it and you get sick, essentially what you do is you look at the reports that come in for those areas, which you can look at TCCS website, and look at the quality of the water. But for some particular reason, it's a mystery to me, is that Yarrabee Pond is not included. And when I've asked about why it's not included, often they just say It's not used for primary swimming, which is fair enough, but it is used for secondary kayaking. And in this particular instance, when we had this activity, I was a little bit reluctant to support it because I was like, it's great that you're doing this, but you should be aware of the fact that this water is not tested. Testing is kind of complex as well because there's a number of different agencies that actually do the testing. So TCCS actually report the statistics, but it could be done by the Department of Health, or it could be done by the Environmental Protection Agency, or it could be done by Water Watch, which is another group that comes through and actually measures certain things about it. So it is quite complex to raise questions about this when you're not an expert, and I'm not an expert in regards to this, because often a lot of the times I get sort of ping-pong balled between all the different departments because I specifically asked a question about blue-green algae, for example, that exist in the ponds, when the algae that's there's not blue-green algae, but it's still algae. So that sort of depends on which type of department you want to talk to. So water quality is another issue that we've sort of had mixed reactions to. We do know that Lake Tuggeranong has had a lot of money that's been spent on it. And one of the things that we've really been pushing for, because I've noticed this, is whether or not more investment could be made with Yarrabee Pond. And I guess the thing that I would like to raise is I don't know why it's been so difficult in order to really talk about simple things like water testing. And realistically, nothing was really done about that, but there was some signs that were erected around the ponds. I think there's one over here that essentially says, this water's not tested, so don't let your dog near it and stuff like that, because potentially it might have algae and stuff like that in it, so it could potentially be poisonous. So they've sort of done that, but they haven't really answered some of these other questions. So we're looking, these are one of these things that are in progress that hopefully we can resolve in the future. It's just very difficult to sort of get a meeting with the government to really sort of like knock that on the head in order to how we can progress further, because Yarrabee Pond is not regarded, it's essentially regarded as a settlement pond, and these types of activities apparently don't exist. So I just wanted to point out here that they do exist and people do kayak on Yarrabee Pond, and if they do, we really need to make sure that these people are aware that it's not tested and that they do so at their own peril type scenario. So just something I wanted to highlight. These are the algae blooms, essentially, at Yarrabee Ponds. Often, a lot of times, they're quite serious from my perspective, because sometimes it almost completely covers the pond. And for a lot of people that walk around Yarrabee Ponds, it really smells. And it's also not good for the wildlife as well. I mean, times before where we've had really bad algal blooms, one of the things that the algal blooms do is they actually take a lot of oxygen out of the water. And we've had actual mass fish deaths at Yarrabee Pond previously, to such an extent where they actually banned, animals going anywhere near the water, and you couldn't take fishing vessels and things like that. It was determined that it was just a particular hot year that year, apparently, and that's what caused the algal blooms to sort of come about. But one of the things that we really wanted this addressed is to make sure that the testing that goes on in Yarrabee Ponds is as up to date as we can, to try and find out the certain chemicals and things like that exist in the water that's contributing to here. I've looked at some of the CHIP reports that come out, and I've sort of been a little bit puzzled because Yarrabee Pond has been quite covered in algae, and a lot of the sort of measurements that sort of came out there said that Yarrabee Pond was in fair condition or quite good condition. And so one of the things, and I mean obviously that's done by volunteers, but one of the questions that I had there going forward was how I could look into the water quality. We did find out that apparently the water is tested, but apparently those results are not made public because of some type of software issue with its ability to be able to do that. So we're getting mixed messages. Sometimes they say it's not tested and sometimes they do say it is tested, but that's really a work in progress. But I can say that one of the good outcomes of we feel that our advocation for Yarrabee Ponds is the floating wetlands. Because we've always known that Lake Tuggeranong has had millions of dollars essentially invested. And one of the things that we really wanted to know was why with you can even see the algae here with the floating wetlands when they're being put in, why Yarrabee Ponds was not included in the federal government funding, because part of that is federal government funding, and ACT government funding, why Yarrabee Ponds wasn't really included. And I guess there was no real clear reason apart from the fact that Lake Tuggeranong was experimental. Essentially, they were using floating wetlands and they were using different processes that were there in order to try and address the algal blooms that were existing there. And I think after that research had sort of finished, they decided that they would move some floating wetlands into Yarrabee Pond. One of the sites is here. The other one is on the other side of the bridge that's there. Leanne Castley recently asked a question in regards to why they chose those two sites, because originally there was meant to be one right up the other end near Horse Park Drive, and we couldn't quite work out why they put two in this particular area. But apparently it was stipulated that it's to do with ribbonweed and not algae. Yeah, it was something to do with ribbonweed, to reduce the ribbonweed growth in that area, not algae. So I was a little bit confused about that, but like a lot of things, sometimes the information that comes through is not entirely clear. We're happy to get them. We just were really curious about now the testing involved in here to make sure whether or not this is having an effect on the chemicals that are in the water. And I guess one of the questions that we asked from a scientific point of view was, if you didn't have a baseline before, then how do you know whether or not the floating wetlands are making a significant difference in it? So that was one of the reasons we were really pushing for, some further analysis into the water makeup. They might have that information, but our ability to be able to get that information in a clear format that we can give to the people who ask me questions regularly about it has been somewhat difficult. So moving on, after the Yorsay, a lot of these things were essentially identified. So basically, one of the important parts, apart from the bench seats, and you can see there's a number of them that were actually built here, which is great, was the lack of bins. And so I know it doesn't seem like much, but a lot of the times I used to find that there was a lot of rubbish actually in Yarrabee Ponds, particularly around the walking paths and areas like this. I've personally seen swans with plastic bags wrapped around their necks and things like that. And when I see things like that, often a lot of the times, sure, people shouldn't be dropping plastic bags and things like that into the water, but I noticed that probably the best way to address it is to have a number of bins in order to maybe help alleviate the problem. After you go to a number of Australia Day cleanups, you start asking the question whether or not there's some way in which we can sort of do something in order to reduce the waste that's in the pond, rather than just continually going there each year and pulling out masses of things. The other thing too is lighting was identified, and there were a couple of locations here that were identified potentially for lighting to go in. Lighting eventually ended up being put into an area that sort of goes down about halfway to about here. And so we're really happy about the fact that lighting has been put into this area. What we're unsure of is why it hasn't sort of continued along this front here. Because one of the things that we're really concerned about, we consistently get asked, is for lighting in this area, because it's very dark. And a lot of the times, as I mentioned before, young demographic, people travelling often from other suburbs, the twilight hours of the day are really important for people to be able to get out and experience Yarrabee Pond. And one of the things that I used to see a lot of is parents with little kids, and they would have flashlights, strapped to their heads type scenario, so that they could try and utilise the areas around this side of the ponds. And often I was struck by how many people used to just walk out of the complete darkness of Yarrabee Pond, and one of the things I was really concerned about was safety and whether or not we could have that highlighted. So really happy about, again, the bench seats, the bins, and the lighting being put into this area. It just seems to have stopped, and we're just curious about where we're going from here in regards to there. So these areas here that are highlighted actually were part of a planning session that we put native plants and things like that in that area in order to support Yarrabee Pond, which was great. It was a great community activity, and we're hoping that we can do a little bit more of that in this area here, basically with the new grant that's been given, so that's great. I probably should go back here and talk about the upgraded toilet facilities. So a feasibility study was conducted to see whether or not we can get toilet facilities built. You can't really see the playground, but the playground's down here, so to have new toilet facilities built here. and new toilet facilities built in the Byzan Street playground area. So those two areas identified. Again, this is about, there are certain members of the community that can't walk all the way around Yarrabee Pond without, going to the toilet. And if you've got young kids and, the elderly, some of these aspects about simple park benches and toilet facilities are really, really important to people. And we really wanted to push that because, it's not fair that some people might feel that they can't come down to Yarrabee Ponds because there's no toilet facilities available. Another thing we highlighted really about the children's playground was there was no baby change facilities that were there, and there's no disabled toilets, surprisingly. There's a disabled swing that's there, but no disabled toilets. And so that really struck me as something that really we needed to push for. The toilets there that are not really great. If you talk to John, he'll tell you all about it. He's not really keen on it. But for us, a lot of nappies and things like that were being left in the children's playground because a lot of the times they were changing them out, and it's not good for anybody really in that regard. So that was pretty important. Another thing that's recently been enacted is some new sculptures, essentially by a local artist. We're really proud of these because I find that they really celebrate the pond, and it is the pond, I think, in some ways, with a lot of the artworks that are down there. I'd like to see more of them, but these particular artworks have always been cherished. They're by Neil Dickinson, and so they've put some new artworks that are in here, and that's been an investment by the ACT government that we're really, really happy about. And so, it's nice to have local artists involved in some of them, and it's great that it really works in with the local environment. Some of these I was sure were really real pelicans. We do get pelicans down there as well, and I think that might have been the initial inspiration for them. So, this is another thing that I notice around Yarrabee Pond as well, is this is an area that's on the other side near Ford, near the underpass to Ford, and sometimes when you get a lot of rain events, essentially I wanted to take a picture of this because some of these areas can be particularly unsafe. Now, I don't know about you, but when you've got kids sort of wandering around in these areas, there's been instances where children have actually been swept into Yarrabee Pond and had to be rescued. So that's actually happened in the past. And one of the things that I noticed is that from an engineering point of view, a lot of these areas where the floodwaters sort of come into are particularly dangerous. And I just wanted to highlight that as something that we really need to sort of look into in the future about either some way to mitigate that or some way to make that a little bit safer. Because as I said, when you have a situation like that with running water coming across the bridges where people are trying to sort of bike across, it's not great. The areas around Yarrabee Pond suffer from parking issues, major parking issues. So sometimes when we've had events like the Gungahlin events and things like that are down there, a lot of the times the big problem is that we can't get large concentrations of people down there for the festivals and things, is because there's simply not enough parking. And the active travel is sort of non-existent down there because a lot of the times in these small areas that are here, the buses can't actually fit down there because the cars are sort of parked along the sides of the roads. So we're hoping in the future, when there's potentially some new parking that's put in this area here, and there's a feasibility study that's being done here, hopefully it can free up some of the car parking spaces that are utilised here because a lot of the businesses suffer a lot. But another aspect too is if you follow these streets all the way along down near the children's playground, you often find that there's just nowhere to park. And that hampers the ability for people to actually come down and enjoy the ponds. And we're hoping that the parking study in future that currently only really looks at a couple of areas really starts to look at some long-term solutions for that. So that's something that we're looking at. Bridge repairs, we talked about floodwater migration, solar lighting expansion. The lights that were installed along Yarrabee Pond were somewhat experimental, but I think they're quite successful. They're solar powered, they don't use energy from the grid, and they've got sensors on them as well, so as you get closer to them, they actually sense that you're walking near them and they actually power up, so that essentially they're good for the environment as well. Mowing and weed management, often a lot of the times that's a bit of an issue for us. We found that Yarrabee Ponds has got two separate schedules. So it's mowed on one side of the ponds to one schedule, and the other side of the ponds on the Amaroo side has a different schedule that we're not too sure of. Another thing that it doesn't have is a dog park or anything like that, which is interesting for a district park, but there are other dog parks that are actually being built in other areas that are probably less utilised than here. But Yarrabee Pond doesn't have a dog park or anywhere really for people to take their dogs down And I particularly say that because there's been a lot of numerous reports that have come through for people that essentially have had issues with dogs down there that haven't been on leashes and things like that. So I think a dog park, maybe potentially in the future, probably might alleviate some of those problems. The footpaths, not in a great state. A lot of them actually have lifted sort of where roots are coming through there, and it's really not great for people that are particularly on bikes, and also people that are on scooters. So one of the things that they talked about was expanding the scooters into Gungahlin, and one of the areas that I knew they were going to be targeting was Yarrabee Pond, and considering that I knew that the footpaths there really were in a fairly bad state of disrepair, I really wanted some more investment to really go in there in order to make them a lot safer. And a lot of the repairs that need to be done sometimes are on blind corners. Like I can tell you that there's some areas around Yarrabee Pond, around sort of this area here, for example, there's lifted sort of areas and stuff like that there that are quite dangerous, that they are marked, so they know they're there. But for the whole, I think it's the whole, more than 10 years that I've been there, they haven't been repaired. So if you have scooters and things like that cruising around in there, one of the things that I really would like to see is more investment in the footpaths. There were some shared signs that were put there to try and help alleviate some of the issues that we had with pedestrians and cyclists. So those signs, I think, have helped a lot in order to sort of, help the people coexist. But it would be great to have some areas around Yarrabee Pond that were maybe widened or the footpaths sort of redone, because sometimes in certain areas there's certain people that are on bikes that essentially want to ride at a pace that's faster than sort of people walking. And I do feel for them, because a lot of the times there's nowhere really for them to overtake apart from them having to go off the beaten track into the scrub type scenario in order to so some areas there that help with cyclists and pedestrians coexist together, so that the cyclists can ride at a faster pace, I think would be advantageous and good to look into in the future. Another thing that I really I'm really conscious of is that it would be nice to get maybe potentially a security camera or something like that it currently exists in Hague Park. So I used to work near Hague Park. I find that there's police security cameras and things like that are there. I would like it to be in an area that's where the children's playground is, because I often find that if there were, God forbid, any incidents and things like that happen down there, we know that a lot of vandalism does tend to happen down there. It'd be nice to have more lighting in those areas, particularly around the skate park as well at night time, so that they can be better utilised. But I think safety is, again, a big concern of mine, and it's not just an area on the Amaroo side, but also on the Gungahlin side as well. I'd like to see some more thought put into the security and to make sure that Yarrabee Ponds is a safer place to be. The food vans and things like that, we went to a fair bit of extent to make sure that the power and things like that were made available for people so that they could come into the ponds in the children's playground area. And so there were some sites that were dedicated in order for people in vans and things like that to come down and power in and get access to water. I was particularly concerned about the fact that before that was engaged, there were people in their vans that actually used to park in the car park area at the playground with a diesel generator having to be powering their power. So it's good to see now that they're actually now into that area now, but I'd like to see a few more areas being utilised for that, so that'd be great. And that's pretty much the presentation. So does anybody have any questions at all?
Any questions on the floor?
Thanks, Darren. Pretty comprehensive. What's your level of confidence that the upcoming ACT budget will include anything to address this long list of requirements? It's a bit tragic that maintenance has to become a major separate funding issue, but let's skip over that. Was there a separate budget submission that you guys made, or are you just hoping that TCCS will do it on your behalf? Or
often, a lot of the times, I think that the Your Say really illustrated what needs to be done. And so the government is completely aware of the issues, but some of the things like parking and some of the things like the toilet facilities, we're waiting on feasibility studies to be conducted in order to support them. I've had some conversations with the government about where we go to.
When
from
you say
here.
the government, who do you mean?
TCCS,
Right.
so specifically about how they will be funded in the future. I do think that more...
And what's the answer to that question?
There is no answer that's come through at the moment. It's basically sit and wait potentially for the budgets in the future to see whether or not money is allocated towards that. So Andrew's got his hand up.
I can answer that.
Yep.
Back to the map. I think that's probably the best way.
Yep.
Buried in a media release today was actually an announcement for the upcoming budget, which said $3.2 million is going to be invested in Yarrabee Pond, including new toilet facilities in the Besant Street playground and down here where the District Park playground is. Also includes new picnic facilities on the southern side, which is on this side. I don't know exactly where they will be. I'm yet to find out more information. Parking on Phyllis Ashton, which is this street just along here. And also more lighting to go around the pond as well.
Okay, so
So that's literally just announced today.
Okay.
I'm getting more information as exactly what and how, but I think that's a good example of, from the direct good work of the Friends of Yarrabee Pond, we are seeing much more investment happening in this area.
That's good.
So I'd say well done to Darren and everyone else.
So I guess I should say that the lighting wasn't just about this area here. There were a lot of complaints that came from people that essentially there's some areas down here in the wooded areas that are down near where the Flying Fox is, particularly dark and particularly dangerous. And so it'd be great to see, I'm just speaking on behalf of the community, that there's certain areas that essentially need to be addressed as well. So hopefully we can see something done there. And particularly, I can't say, is the people in the skate park essentially were looking for lighting as well so that they could better utilise the skate park afterwards.
So just while I still got the microphone, the skate park's clearly pretty tired and dilapidated.
Yeah.
And I know that the ACT government have an inquiry or something's going on in relation to skate parks. But what's even more tired than the skate park are the dirt jump tracks.
Yeah.
And kind of that's a bit of a segue into, have you engaged with Pedal Power around the state of the shared path, the possibility of building a cycle-only path to separate cyclists and pedestrians and other high-speed people from slow-speed people?
Yeah.
And looked at some of the things going on with the jumps community are trying to do some things. I think Rotary have been kind of circling around that again. There clearly needs to be some interface between that. And there has been a consultancy led around cycling in the town centre that looks at better access to Yarrabee as well. So linking in with those active travel communities might be worthwhile. I'm happy to help with that.
I think often a lot of the times we feel a little bit stretched at times because there's not a lot of us. And sometimes it can be difficult because we're sort of trying to cover a lot of different topics. And we're trying to cover them equally because these are what the feedback that we get from the community. And I guess we haven't had a lot of cyclists sort of talk to us, and I think I'll take your point that we should be reaching out more to the cyclist community, Pedal Power and things, that representative organisations, about what they would like. We've had the occasional comment that's come through to us about what they would like, and I often find from observation a lot of the times the cyclists are really sort of like wanting to travel a lot faster, but are really inhibited by a lot of the pedestrians. And one of the things that we had the shared path signs was to try and sort of alleviate maybe some of the issues that people had. We kind of felt that there was a little bit of animosity between the pedestrians and the cyclists, and we believe that could be alleviated if there were better signage and there were better facilities there. So we'll work with Pedal Power. It's an interesting question about the bike track that's there, because originally we weren't too sure who constructed it. And it was just, it's a mystery there. There's a sign that's actually there that I had a look at, and I looked at both sides of it, and it gives me no real indication as to who it belongs to.
I know, and I know the people involved with it, so I'm more than happy to facilitate that.
because one of the things is also when there's rain and things like that, it washes away a lot of those tracks, and so it's not even really being kept at a particular standard because of that non-ownership of what's going on there. So
one of many problems with it.
yeah, it'd be great to see that looked at as well as the skate park. I think you might have, Andrew Raddick might have spoken about from memory, I think it was raised in the Legislative Assembly about whether or not the minister was, investing money into the bike track that was behind the skate park, and I think the answer was just no at that stage. So it has been raised. It's just really, there's a lot of things about Yarrabee Pond that can be very difficult to get things done, because a lot of the times you want people to realise there's an issue in the first place, and then you need to find the relevant agencies within the ACT government, and then once you've raised that, you need to then start to really concentrate on how you're going to get the funding in order to address it. And I'll take your point that if you're not really conversing as actively with those stakeholder groups, then essentially you're not going to be able to sort of progress that as quickly as you potentially could. So, good point.
Great work, Darren. It's really exemplary, if you like, on how we can actually get things done. We've got a few other places.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas on how we can get Gungahlin Ponds more active?
It's been raised.
And the other one is the grasslands that are pretty not used at all. Nothing in there.
Yeah, it's raised a lot that often a lot of the times people from certain other areas of Gungahlin, Ngunnawal and areas like that, they sort of say, it's great about Yarrabee Ponds, what about our particular area? And I believe in that as well. I want to incorporate those areas. I guess the things that I've been working at the moment with Yarrabee Ponds is trying to understand who's responsible for Yarrabee Ponds, for a start, if we're talking about a pond. And I really have to knock that on the head, is that what I've discovered is essentially TCCS is responsible for Yarrabee Pond, and they regard Yarrabee Pond as just an urban park, I guess, or a parkland, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And one of the things that I often run into when I'm asking questions about that is that the people that I talk to would often say, well, we don't really have expertise in the environment to sort of answer that question. And a lot of the people that I have to sort of liaise with, even the floating wetlands is a classic example, that's a university sort of led project. Some of them don't work for the ACT government, and often a lot of the times when I do ask questions specifically about it, I'm sort of ping-ponged around as if to say, well, I'm not the relevant department, I don't know who you really need to talk to. And we sort of need to sort of work really hard as volunteers, because there's nobody that's really responsible for Yarrabee Pond that we could talk to from the ACT government who would be able to say, yes, that's a good question, I don't know the answer to that, but John or Bob or Mary or Lisa is responsible for this area, and they'll liaise with the relevant department and get you an answer to that question. And I think if that were the case, if that was in place, we would have got a lot of answers to a lot of questions in regards to the health of the ponds and the water quality and these sorts of questions a lot faster than we have found. And sometimes we kind of feel like we're a bit stonewalled with that. So I find that the answers that I'm now finding now about the relevant departments that I can talk to can be utilised in order to address the concerns in the ponds and other areas that are around.
So do you think we should be asking for better governance, if you like, of these different areas?
I believe that there's a missing link there in regards to the governance of the ponds, for example, because the ponds are a wildlife area. And one of the things that I talk to the government about is about rangers and things like that. I actually rang through to them and I talked to them and they said, well, yeah, we're rangers, but we have no authority over Yarrabee Pond. So we can't come there and have anything to do with wildlife, for example, if there's wildlife sort of issues and things. And to get in contact with TCCS, sometimes when I talk to them about some of these areas, they don't really have the expertise. And that's not their fault. But the question is right about governance, is about, well, if I can recognise there's an issue here, maybe the ACT government really needs to look into areas like Yarrabee Pond about the governance of those areas to make it a lot easier for community groups when you ask complicated questions sometimes in order to raise those issues internally within the ACT government rather than having to rely on your says and petitions all the time for what I believe are, lighting issues, park benches and bins. I don't believe them to be hugely complex
So
issues.
should it be something like Friends of Yerraby Pond become
I mean, speaking personally, the problem is the ACT government has no structure for spatial accountability, which would mean is, well, I'm responsible for space. If you speak to any minister, any directorate, leader, and say, who is responsible for Gungahlin or Tuggeranong or Western Creek, they stare at their feet. No one is responsible for making a space work, whether it's a park or a town centre or a road or anything. It's always someone else's problem.
So do we need to have community responsibility?
I think community can exist to a certain extent.
But community's great, but community doesn't. It's not responsible.
That's right.
There needs to be someone within the government that is accountable to how well a district or a road or a suburb works. I mean, there's a detail to be worked out here. But at the moment, you spend all your time just trying. If something's happening on a road, you don't know if it's ACT roads, the suburban land agency, or major projects, or minor projects, or
and that can take a
but
long
that's
time.
Every single thing. It's not unique to a park.
Yeah. So how do we solve the problem?
I'd storm the assembly and put in a new government, but I don't know.
Often a lot of these questions are painstakingly sort of answered by having to get in contact with local MLAs in order to raise these issues. And often a lot of the time some of them are quite simple and some of them can be quite complex. And sometimes I've even, like for water quality, for example, I was sent the raw data. And I don't know about you, but I don't know how to read it, and I don't have the resources in order to do that. And in some retrospects, that's, it's a sort of fulfilling prophecy in a sense that if I have a meeting with TCCS, for example, and I'm talking about ribbonweed, and the result is that ribbonweed is good because birds eat it. But then I ask the question, yes, but when you've got a bridge area here where there's so much of it that the birds essentially are walking on it, and that it stops the water flow essentially moving around, could this be contributing to the blue-green algae? And is there anybody that's responsible for sort of looking at issues like that? Often that doesn't exist. And it's only until we've sort of spoken to these certain university sort of areas that essentially we're looking into here that we, and Leanne Cashley even mentioned about the ribbonweed that was in these particular areas here that were quite bad, that something was sort of done about it. I think somebody's gone down there. But there's nobody that's sort of looking after this area as the unique sort of area that it is. Both, it's a recreational area, it's an area where people go out on watercraft, it's an area that cyclists use, it's an area that people sort of walk around. There's children's playgrounds, there's natural wildlife and fauna. And that's a complex issue because there's lots of different types of people that you would need to talk to. So it'd be great to have a government sort of agency or government department that essentially recognises the complexity here, because I feel that that's sort of missing a little bit and has made our job as a volunteer group quite difficult in order to achieve this, and the reason why it's taken a number of years. But very happy with the contribution that's been given thus far. We've just got some more work to do, and it's great to hear that there's a number of millions of dollars that's been allocated here. But as I said, that won't necessarily help with the governance issues probably in the future, and I think that would be really helpful if that was the case. And we can use some of the lessons that are learned here in order to emulate and start to look at other areas and other ponds, because as part of the catchment, this is all the same. Water comes down from stormwater through here, and it ends up in the Ginninderra catchment sort of areas as well. So the better the quality of the water in Yarrabee Pond, the better the quality of the water further downstream. And that's what's really important about these catchment areas, is that they are the best that we could possibly make them. Any more questions?
Darren, we got a question from online. I think Simon saying the issue they found is the quality management of the work being undertaken in the area. It is disappointing that the government spends a lot of money on upgrades and repairs and they are not done properly or not probably in working condition or correctly managed through the defects liability period. An example would be trees planted and dying within 12 months and then not being replaced. So yeah, on and on, kind of, the maintenance issue, whether, when they do some project work, are they being maintained properly?
I think sometimes one of the issues that we have is, and I think I've experienced this with the Gungahlin Community Council as well, is you do have an initial really good consultation period with the public. But then what happens afterwards is the general public is sort of fenced out from that point forward, and there's no opportunity in order to help stakeholders, whoever they might be, contribute to the process of the expenditure of that funds as it goes through in order to avoid issues. Simon, was it?
Yeah.
Has well pointed out that sometimes the expenditure of the funds on to address the particular problem is a good thing, but sometimes if it isn't done in close consultation with the people that have initially raised the issue, unfortunately you might have a situation where the money's spent and it doesn't address the issue. So one of the things that I would say to the ACT government, and I think that they're aware of it, is community engagement. It should not be just that initial sort of your say that you have. What you really need to do is to talk to stakeholders throughout the entire life of the project of what you're building to make sure that it's really addressing some of those core issues for the general public. Because the expenditure of the money is in the interest to try and address the problems that people have raised. So those people are actually important in the implementation of the solution, I feel, going forward. I have a very strong view of a democratic process in this. And sometimes one of the things that I don't like to see is that for stakeholders essentially to be sort of fenced out and essentially it implemented, because mistakes can be made in not implementing. So, for example, if you're doing footpaths, for goodness sakes, please talk to Pedal Power about what exactly you're thinking about doing, because they might have some experience from projects that have been built before that might not have lived up to expectations. And so I think that stakeholders are really important to make sure that the precious money that's invested in them after all the lobbying gets spent in the correct way.
And what they mentioned as well, they also brought this to the attention of the authorities, and it's still not attended. So
yeah, there's a lot of concern I have when people are sort of directed to fix my street. The Fix My Street seems to be a sort of one-stop shop for a lot of these sort of questions. And my feedback, at least, that I've had is that some of these concerns are not really answered and not really addressed. So I think that Fix My Street is sort of better than nothing. But sometimes I've found that stakeholders, again, the certain stakeholders, they're really good at being able to amalgamate a lot of the concerns that the community has and be able to represent those concerns to the ACT government to address a problem, rather than sort of relying on sort of your say as individuals having to do it. Because some people are somewhat reluctant, maybe potentially, to use the your say because they've had a bad experience in the past. Stakeholders and community groups like the Gungahlin Community Council, we often hear from the general public, we are good conduits in order to amalgamate the general concerns of the community, because that's what we do. We represent the concerns that come to us, to the government, and that's our job, that's our place. And the Friends of Yarrabee Pond is no different, essentially. So we are the conduit of the community in order to do that. So why not involve them in that process? In the longer term, I think that you have less problems.
excellent.
Okay. Thanks for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thanks again, Darren. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think the good news that Andrew announced about the funding, because 2 months back or 3 months back when I had the meeting with the TCCS and then chasing up about all these things, and they were saying, oh, the design work, it's all completed, we're just waiting for the funding. So I'm glad that the funding has been approved, and thank you again, Darren. I hope you all enjoyed tonight with the presentation, and hope it's all very informative. And if you have any topics, if you're listening online and if you want us to cover those topics, happy to do it. I think that comes to the end of the meeting, unless Andrew or Leon have any very important updates, any good news for Gungahlin, so you can... Is it in the Gungahlin area? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks so much, Henley. Thanks, everybody. So after a My Gungahlin just a question on Facebook that said, name the worst intersection in Gungahlin, and a lot of the responses were, what, just one? I thought I'd kick off a petition. We had so many people come to me, so we've got a petition going to talk about improving traffic flow and intersection safety. Now, yes, it's got the QR code here, but I've confirmed tonight while we've been chatting that it definitely works. So if you would like information on that, I'll pop it on my Facebook page. And with the QR code, we've also got a link to my website if you'd like to keep updated on how the petition goes and any further information we get. And it's just, again, to keep raising with the government the concerns that we have around traffic safety. I know Efkapedes is a big problem for a lot of people near Club Lime, the bottom of Bunnings there. That's quite hairy. Takeaway lane, I think that's what people are calling it now in Gungahlin. Anyway, we've put a radius on it. There's a big spot, so please, if you'd like, sign the petition and we'll hopefully get an inquiry into it for Gungahlin. And yes, as Darren mentioned, we have asked about the wetlands and they will be doing testing, but I realise we may not have been specific enough in our request for responses, but we'll keep pushing that and asking all of the other questions. Thank you.
Cool. Talking about Gungahlin intersections, I too have a petition. It's actually about the Gribble Street, Hibberson Street intersection, which is where you think about the Bunnings beacon lighting on that corner there across the road from the Gungahlin Library, in terms of how far it's required for pedestrians to be able to cross there safely, which is quite a busy area, so I've got one petition there. Also, heads up, I had the motion last week in the Assembly calling for more economic activation in the Gungahlin area, which is the reason why you received some of those questions, and also looking at very specific employment targets to be put in place for Gungahlin, because we need to enable people to be able to work closer to where they live, to shorten their commutes, allow them to be able to ride, walk their way to work instead of having to get in their car and travel across all the way the Civic. That passed with the support of all parties in the Assembly, so that's now requesting the government to look into that and report back to us by the end of the year. So that's really good. And also just the announcements as I made today in terms of more money for Yarrabee Pond. So I think that's a good outcome and a reflection of good work Friends of Yarrabee Pond have done.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Leon. It's great. Some of the things shows when we work together, I think we can achieve more. And looks certainly the petition is the trend. I think, since we started this, the first petition, I think it's all going, and I'm glad that, there are a lot of petitions happening. And also, I'm thankful for some of the MLAs who are working along with us in terms of asking our feedback and all those things. And I hope you continue to do so. And, that is a great initiative as well. So thanks again. Thank you to the speakers for tonight. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Darren. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Stay safe. Have a good night. God bless. Take care.